This video is not intended for viewers under the age of 16. Well, I got nothing better to do right now. I'm kind of bored out of my mind. Let me just refer to the checklist I made in case of boredom. Currently, my options are actually contribute to society and get a job, or start a YouTube channel. That's kind of a tough decision. On one hand, I could watch my free time, credibility, and will to live crumble as I enslave myself to never-ending misery for a measly profit. Or I could get a job. I'll just go find who's hiring online. I'm sure the job market at this current moment in June 2026 is filled to the brink with listings for self-taught intermediate artists like me. YouTube channel it is. But what to make it about? I mean, I could just do what every aspiring YouTuber does and rant about Nintendo, but I need something to really set me apart from the pack. Something that plays to my strengths as a visual artist, and preferably on a community that I've been a part of for almost a decade now. A community that's very insular and seen as niche or odd outside of said community, and say how long has that been printing for? Yeah, that'll work. Furries. What a topic to talk about to nobody except for a camera. There's tons of untapped potential. But what would I call this, the Sponge Magic Furry video thing? Yep, that's what I'm calling it. I'm calling it the Sponge Magic Furry video thing. Hi, my name is Robin. I'm an autistic trans woman and self-taught intermediate artist who draws herself as a red panda online. Perhaps you've heard of me through my escapades on the internet on one of the many social media platforms I was cooped up on since the start of the decade. I consider myself to be a part of the furry community for coming up on 9 years now, and... give me a sec, I need to process something. Okay, I'm back. So yeah, I've been a furry for a pretty long time, before my egg cracked even. I joined for incredibly petty reasons, but I eventually learned to love this incredibly off-kilter and odd community of animal people on its own merits. What this channel and these videos aim to do is to introduce and teach concepts commonplace in this community to outsiders of the community, newcomers to the community, and veterans that have been here forever, and also present it in a way that isn't just me reading a Wikipedia article. Now, I'm sure that a few people have a burning question brewing in the back of your mind. That being... get this, like what is this? Well, strap yourselves in, because I'm about to introduce you to the world of fur and fuzz. And no, I'm not referring to anything sexual. Well, a furry is a blanket term. It could mean many, many things. But in a general sense, a furry is someone who has a fascination with anthropomorphic animal characters. That's pretty much it. What that entails is up to the individual, from just thinking that they're neat, to immersing themselves deep within the trenches of the community, the likes of which can drive any small Victorian child to certain madness. The word anthropomorphic means something that exhibits human characteristics or traits. In our case, this means animals that walk on their hind legs, talk, are capable of complex thought, you know, human shit. Basically, if this animal understands what a W2 is, chances are it's probably anthropomorphic. The word's etymology originates from Greek, literally just meaning human form. Anthropomorphism isn't limited to just animals. Things like plants, machinery, the elements, hell, even concepts as broad as death can be anthropomorphized. This phenomenon has existed for as long as humans have. Almost every culture has used anthropomorphism in some form or fashion. Many ancient cultures created their gods as anthropomorphized human forms to explain natural phenomena beyond their understanding of how the world works. You can see this all over the world, from Greek Hellenism, Japanese Shintoism, indigenous cultures across the Americas, and ancient Egyptian religion. Anthropomorphic animals specifically aren't a new concept either, often being the subject of many fables and pieces of local folklore. From the stories of Aesop, the Germanic fairy tales documented by the Brothers Grimm, or the Indian Jataka, recounting the stories of Buddha Gautama's many incarnations as certain animals, and the Panchatantra, recounting many ancient animal-centered oral fables from across the subcontinent. Anthropomorphic animals are often seen as shorthand, or to quickly get a point across, or to help when telling these stories, usually by taking a look at an animal's unique traits and working from there. Aesop's tortoise and the hare fable is a classic example, with the hare being characterized as a speedy hothead, and the tortoise as slow but determined. I tell you what, I'd definitely not trust a hare any time of the week. It's like if you took a normal-ass rabbit and forced it to eat cigarettes. We as humans like to find the humanity in things that aren't human. It's why things like pareidolia exist, or the phenomena of finding faces in things that otherwise don't have living features. It's the reason why this plug looks so happy or why this car has a mustache. Anthropomorphic talking animals will continue to be used in children's literature and other forms at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries, with seminal books like Peter Rabbit, Winnie the Pooh, the symphonic Peter and the Wolf, The Adventures of Pinocchio. Why is he stanced up like a hype beast, and why is he wearing a traffic cone on his head? Animal Farm, The Chronicles of Narnia, Alice's Adventures in Alleged Child Molestation, The Jungle Book, and, Disney. Early 20th century animation from the likes of Disney, Warner Brothers, MGM, and Fleischer Studios, where animated shorts not necessarily made for children playing before motion pictures, would star anthropomorphic animal characters doing all manner of things, some of which I can't show because it was made by white people in the 1940s.
Here we show you a close-up of a frog croaking.
The choice for anthropomorphic animals served both as a shorthand, that I mentioned before, and making it easier on the animators to draw said characters, because the human form is easier to animate with. And having all of these unique designs are more visually interesting than man, and said animators couldn't keep it in their pants.
Here is a lizard which, as you all probably know, sheds its skin once a year. Let's watch this interesting procedure.
This goes on for another minute. Needless to say that the proliferation of anthropomorphic animals across film, books, and comics, and eventually even on television, would help keep the idea of anthropomorphism alive and well, while the threat of total nuclear annihilation lay weary above everybody's heads. And the people watching and reading those pieces of media would eventually grow up to work in those creative industries, either professionally or as a hobby in underground circles. By the 1970s, the mass adoption of photocopier machines and dedicated print shops to mass-produce publications for cheap prices would be instrumental in the formation of underground movements, such as the furry community. Yes, finally, we're talking about the thing this entire YouTube channel is about. Took long enough, it's been like, 5 minutes? Sheesh, I ramble on, no wonder no one talks to me! But indeed, the world of self-published magazines and comics, and its boom in the early 1970s up to the late 80s, is where we could see the formation of the furry community take shape. These self-published magazines, shortened to just zines, would become prolific amongst rising fandoms of topics like rock music, science fiction, and more niche topics like individual TV shows like Star Trek. With the rise of quick and easy photocopying services, specifically the office store chain Kinko's, circulation of these zines will become more widespread amongst their communities. Instead of spending laborious hours setting up type and using negatives and other techniques that just cost money, you can just create one version of your final print and just copy the pages for a small fee, no hassle. The plus side of photocopying, or xerography, is that it's much easier to make copies of art. This leads us to the seminal proto-furry artwork, Voodie, the APA, that's Amateur Press Association, of the funny animal fandom, with its first issue being published in the Minneapolis area in spring of 1976. Yeah, before it was called the furry fandom, it was called the funny animal fandom, still likening back to its association with the comics and animations that starred anthropomorphic animals. Voodie and other scenes like it were started in response to a vacuum in the zine space, with the lack of anthropomorphic animal characters and art that weren't being produced by the big Hollywood animation studios at the time. The creators of Voodie, Reed Waller and Ken Fletcher, sought to fill that void and recruit artists and writers who wanted to discuss aspects of comics that weren't just related to superheroes. Like others in the underground publication zine, Voodie and its ilk would often delve into more risque and adult-oriented topics. It's important to keep in mind that these zines were not necessarily meant for a wider audience, and mainly appealed to the interests of these smaller communities that were likely to be reading these in the first place. And with niche interests and adult-oriented topics, it would only be inevitable that a certain type of content would show up in these zines. You know what I'm talking about.
Sex.
The community was no stranger to erotica and sexual content, even as far back as the 70s, which leads to a question I'm sure many outside of the community will eventually ask. Was this furry thing always about sex? Well, I mean, yes, and also no, it's complicated. And something I don't feel comfortable putting in this particular video, mainly because I feel it deserves its own longer discussion that would derail this video entirely. But from what I understand doing my own research into the genesis of the community, sexuality was a big component of it, and it still is to this day, which I think is very important. Adults should have a space to discuss sexuality without having to speak in code words and euphemisms, or to avoid the conversation entirely to make sure the pearl-clutching, "Won't somebody please think of the children" conservatives don't throw a hissy fit. I have no idea how to transition into this, so, like most subcultures and movements, the furry community's origins didn't start in a specific place, which is why we're gonna go from Minnesota all the way to Southern California. This is Mark Merlino, a regular at the local sci-fi fantasy conventions in Orange County, California, and he would learn about this funny animal fandom in the early 70s. He would also take an interest in cartoons made in Japan, a type of media that would be called anime in the West. That's how you pronounce that, right? With enough people, Merlino, alongside founding members including one Fred Pattern, would found the Cartoon Fantasy Organization, or CFO, in 1977. So I remember in high school there being this fake culture war between furries and anime fans that certainly 100% was not a thing. It's kind of funny considering that their origins are one and the same. Yes, one of the big reasons the anime fandom was so prominent in the West is because of a few furries' interests back in the late 70s, so you're welcome. Mark and company would organize meetings to watch and discuss imported anime they had access to, either through low-quality TV recordings on VHS or film reels. While initially starting out showcasing a greater variety of works, like Astro Boy, Mazinger Z, and later on works like Dr. Slump, more interest was placed into the shows starring anthropomorphic animals, such as Kim of the White Lion, with many members of the CFO also being artists and contributors to local funny animal zines, often trading info and art amongst each other. In addition to these meetings, room parties were also held at sci-fi fantasy conventions to watch anthro-animal-centered shows and movies. As these parties grew, the term to classify these shows and movies would broaden from funny animal to furry. There it is, took them long enough. And with more and more people attending these room parties, contributing and buying zines, and more artists popping up, including authors of furry literature, Mark and company could only come to one conclusion: a furry convention. Conference was the first ever furry convention, and as much as I'd like to talk about it, its history, and show off what it was like, that's a story for another time, I'm afraid. The way I see it, Conference Zero, held in 1989, was the birth of modern furry culture, the tipping point of decades of smaller organizations and groups, gaining enough traction to form into a larger whole, and even then, with room to grow into the giant beast of a community that we know and fear today. But the late 80s and 90s were when the community really picked up steam, and it was thanks to new advancements in technology. Hey, you know the internet? No, I'm not implying that a furry invented the internet, but furries were very early adopters of the internet before the mass adoption of the internet in the late 90s. Usenet groups would... Wait, do people under 40 even know what that is? Okay, imagine a message board or an IRC client. No, that's still too old. Imagine a forum. Shit, do people still use forums? Imagine if Reddit was made 40-something years ago and didn't have a centralized server and wasn't owned by a big conglomerate. I know some old heads will kill me over that analogy. Where was I? Oh yeah, furry Usenet groups, specifically these, would emerge in the early 90s. Want other forms of online communication? BBSs were an even older form of communication. Not enough? Try Muck. Spelled with a C and a K. Furry Muck was an extremely early text-based role-playing game that launched around the same time and would serve as a way for people to roleplay as their personas, or furry character that is meant to personify yourself. It's still active to this day. The rise of digital graphic editing programs, photo scanners, and image boards made distributing amateur and hobbyist art even easier. And with the internet being available worldwide, allowed more people to get in contact and talk to each other. At the turn of the millennium and into the early aughts, proprietary furry-centered platforms like Fur Affinity and early social media platforms would only make communication with other furries even easier. Not to mention the proliferation of furry conventions across the United States, and eventually Europe, Asia, and Latin America. It's a lot. Come the 2010 to the present day, and the community is vast and kind of terrifying. To put it another way, the second oldest furry convention in the US, Anthrocon, started its first year in 1997 with 500 attendees. That number would eventually reach 4,000 attendees in 2010. Last year in 2025, that number was 18,000. 18,000! With people coming from all across the world to attend. In any other context, you'd have to be on a business trip or be bribed to actively want to go to Pittsburgh. The community is monstrous and may seem a little overwhelming to those joining for the first time. For me, dividing the community at large into different factions helped a lot. And I should say first that My word is not gospel and should not be taken at face value. This community, much like a lot of other things in life, is complicated and diverse. It's just a fun way to categorize and make sense of this massive cultural movement. So, factions, huh? I divided up into 7 different groups, and just because you're in one doesn't mean you're barred from any other one. People can be a part of a bunch of different factions. I would use a 7-way Venn diagram, but I'm not ready to decipher what all of that is. The fursuiters. This is the one you'll probably see the most on your social media feeds, YouTubes, and OnlyFans subscriptions, I don't judge. A friendly reminder that you do not need a fursuit to be a furry. The majority of the community does not have one. You just see a disproportionate amount of fursuits because, in all fairness, this is a lot more interesting to look at than White Woman. Hey! Fursuits are one step removed from animal mascot costumes and are feats of costume design, and a testament to the greatest rule of the community, which is, furries will advance technology for the sole purpose of wanting to be more like an animal. Whether this benefits the rest of humanity doesn't matter. Seriously, techniques and technology have been developed to make these living cartoon characters look more alive and animated. It's probably why these things are so damn expensive. Some of the more advanced techniques that go into fursuits are kinda nuts. In addition to fursuiters getting the most attention due to the fun colors and shapes they always have with them, there's also a level of showmanship that's kind of required in order to be in fursuit. It's kind of like cosplay, literally Japanese portmanteau of costume and play. It's a performance, which only further strengthens my theory that most furries were ex-theater kids in high school. Not that I'd know anything about that. I was never in any kind of drama production in school or really anything to do with the performing arts. The visual artists. I'd say this is the most prominent faction, certainly the oldest, and definitely the most important, and I'm not saying that because I am part of this faction. Okay, maybe a little. The community was founded on the backs of artists, and furry art commissions are a very, look at me, very important part of the culture. And it's not just drawing. 3D modeling, animating, film editing, and even fursuit making. It's a symbiotic relationship, where non-artists commission the artists for art of their characters, and as a result, the non-artists can show cool art of them, and the artist can afford rent. Where else do you think the suspiciously wealthy furry meme came from? By the way, who made this meme? I want to know because that's categorically not true. The authors. The underappreciated faction in the community. Your wordsmiths, journalists, screenwriters, really anyone who writes anything down can be considered a writer. There's a lot of written media in the community. Like 75% of it's erotica, but don't be greedy now. I generally found that writers keep to themselves, even more so than visual artists. The engineers. By the way, who made this meme? I want to know because that's categorically not true. Oh yeah. There's a joke amongst the community that the TSA would be screwed if anything happened to them over the 4th of July weekend, because a good portion of their IT department would be in Pittsburgh at Anthrocon. I'm telling you, why would you ever go to Pittsburgh in any other context? Being a community founded by nerds for nerds, it's not surprising in the slightest that a large number of them would have some career in the sciences. Computer science, medical science, other kinds of sciences that I can't name because I'm an artist and I'm not that smart. I nearly failed every science class I took in high school. Like, no thanks, I'll stick to drawing and definitely not being in the performing arts. Still, the fact that there are such brilliant minds amongst the community in these fields is kind of incredible, and becomes more and more baffling to people outside of the community, that certain extremely beneficial things were made by furries. Remember COVID? I wish I could forget. Pretty scary disease, and basically shut down the entire world for a year. Chances are you're vaccinated and have gotten boosters. And if you got the Moderna vaccine, instrumental development of it was developed by an anthropomorphic pine marten, and you will transform into an animal person around 5 years after you took it. Aww. All of that is true, minus the turning into an animal thing. And Chice, aka Sailor Scout on Blue Sky, is one of the most respected members of the community for a reason. And we love a bad bitch that saves countless lives and debunks bullshit conspiracies about vaccines. You know Greenlight Biometrics? That green light on your phone or smartwatch that can scan for your fingerprint or monitor your heart rate? The one that's on almost every fitness tracker device today? Yeah. Dr. Benarin, sadly no longer with us, used Greenlight technology to track heart rate because Greenlight worked extremely well on all skin colors, which is awesome. His persona's name was Spoticus. I love it. Now this one really surprised me. A Dutch fursuiter, Easy Wolf, would create a cooling system using something called phase change material that can be used while fursuiting because, you know, those things do tend to get hot. This cooling system, now called Easy Cooldown, has been adopted by people outside of Furrydom, like general cosplayers, construction workers, athletes, and the United States military. Yes, this is real. Furries have aided in the military-industrial complex. You can f***ing say that about weeaboos. And that's not even mentioning the advancements in VR that were single-handedly asterisk made by furries. Like, wow, Facebook's metaverse tanked? Do you think the furry in VR chat watching episodes of King of the Hill at a 100% accurate recreation of a Waffle House is gonna care? Did you hear that? The performing artists. Former theater kids rejoice! That inkling of whether or not you think you're a furry has come true! Now get in the box! There is a non-zero chance that if you were a theater kid in high school, you were probably skirting around the idea of being one. Not like I know anything about that! Like I said before, fursuiters tend to display some form of showmanship or play a character. Fursuiters and performing artists tend to overlap, especially in terms of fursuit dance. Cause once you see someone pull this shit off in 10 pounds of foam and hair, you know they ain't f***ing around. But it's not just dance. It's acting, comedy, MCing, voice acting like the voiceover that I'm doing right. Singing and playing an instrument are massive sectors of the performing artists too. You ever heard of furry opera? Oh yeah, that's definitely a future video. Oh man, this list just keeps filling up! And to a lesser extent, furtubers and social media influencers are kind of in this category too. This is not to be confused with the term popufur, because every term in this fandom has to be some grown-tastic pun. Popufurs are basically celebrities or people with a massive influence inside of the community, and they don't get their own faction because I hate celebrity culture and parasocial relationships in general. Like and subscribe. The entrepreneurs.
Is that gonna hurt?
One of the great things about the furry community is that, unlike many other large fandoms and communities, furries actively shun the idea of it going mainstream and big companies trying to invade their space. When you go to a furry convention and head over to the dealer's den, you won't see a mega corporation in sight. Furries truly value the idea of local and indie businesses, and it's all thanks to the entrepreneurs who make that bank! Of course you got commissions and fursuit makers, it always comes back to fursuits. But for the things that laymen can actually afford, we got t-shirts, keyring charms, posters for days, collars, and other leather things, just to remind you that this community is really f***ing kinky. And of course, stickers. Stickers, 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 stickers. Stickers have engraved themselves into furry culture, and it's hard to not see people trading stickers or making custom stickers of their personas. Come back from any furry convention and there's a high chance that you'll have a stray sticker in one of your pockets. So yeah, furries love buying things from other furries, and that's kind of beautiful. It really emphasizes the community aspect. And it's not like the people running the shops are competitive towards each other. Oftentimes they share and help each other out. It's the future that'd make any trillionaire Nepo baby CEO have a fatal heart attack and die. I for one always championed local businesses and mom and pop shops, even before I really dived into the community. It is such a welcome change from the usual capitalist hellscape that we live in. God, I wish that AI bubble would f***ing pop already so I could potentially afford a house. The normies. When I say normie, I'm insinuating the type of people that don't really participate heavily in the community, but just think that animals that walk on their hind legs are neat.
Mom, you're always trying to give me
Furries.
What is it with you? I just think they're neat.
They may not go to conventions, be open about their interests, or hell, they might not even have a persona. A lot of the time, these people come from other fandoms, in which furries tend to overlap with. Anime is a big one, as you'd probably expect, but there's also video games, local queer communities, and cosplay. Canadian furtuber and mutual of mine ZKart became a furry after being knee-deep in the cosplay community trenches for years now. I like to think of this faction as like a transitional faction, in more ways than one. Like, you'll stay there for a little while until you're ready to either take that plunge or decide that maybe furry isn't for me. No hard feelings. Some people can find it to be a bit overwhelming. So this leads to the big picture question. Why furry? I don't know, because animal people are hot? No. I think the real reason people are furries is because it's all inclusive. In 2026, we as a collective are currently living in an extremely dangerous and unsure time. The rise of neo-fascism, the economic recession, deportation of immigrants and the separation of their families, the AI and slapification of internet platforms. Nobody knows what's real, what's fake, what's genuine, and what's not. Furries, more or less, are welcoming to all walks of life. It's a place for people of color, queer folk, people with physical and neurological disabilities do not have to put up their shields in order to justify their right to exist. There are no outcasts in the community. We're all outcasts. Furries are also extremely helpful, and are usually super friendly. I don't think I've met a fursuiter that wasn't an absolute delight to talk to. They love exchanging hugs, being silly, and also incredibly hot. Let me just add fursuit crushes to the list. Also, the biggest reason why people are furries is just because it's fucking fun. Being an adult sucks. Don't kid yourself, it really does. Paying taxes, dealing with insurance, working a 9 to 5, they all blow chunks. And people who only concern themselves with these things usually require a weekly checkup to make sure they're not dead inside. Freedom is an escape from that, a place to let go and be silly or affectionate towards each other. We're a very touchy-feely group, unless you do not want to be touched or felt, in which case we'll respect your boundaries. Consent is important. We're always willing to lend a hand, support each other, and help raise each other up. I wouldn't have made it anywhere as an internet artist without friends to help me up. Furries aren't just losers who pretend to be animals. Many of them hold jobs, are married, have families, own businesses, and live completely normal lives in every aspect, except that they think that animal people are cool, and they may spend money on an animal costume the price of a new hatchback, but what they do with their money isn't your f***ing business. How's that NFT treating you? Not to mention, almost every furry convention usually donates a portion of their money to charities. So many of them advocate for the rights of queer people, BIPOC, disabled people, and immigrants all the same. And we're super diligent about getting bad apples and fascies out of the picture. Trust me, I will have a lot to say about those particular topics, so look forward to that. Is it weird? Oh, absolutely. But trust me, I think most people in the community are well aware of how odd it is. You don't see a bunch of people in custom-made animal costumes commandeering your local Hilton for a weekend and go, business as usual. But damn it, that's what makes this place such a blast to be a part of. I love how weird this place is. All my life, I've tried to hide any of my interests from other people, especially in high school. I was, and still am, extremely self-conscious and worried about everything I do, down to the last minute detail. Going to my first furry convention and being surrounded by people who were just as strange as me, and being open about it, getting hugs from people I only met that day, it was such a welcome change. When it was over and my carpool dropped me off at my house, I cried. I don't think I've ever been more vindicated and loose that weekend than I had been all my life. I felt a confidence within me to be more productive, more social, and make more connections. I don't think I'd be half the man and all the woman I am today without the furry community. Now, if for some reason you want to give this furry thing a shot, well, where do you go from here? The obvious next step is to talk with furries and check out local fur meets, or a small unofficial gathering of furries, usually at a mall, arcade, park, or bowling alley. Maybe don't start right away with a convention unless you've already been to non-furry ones. Of course, there's always social media and online messaging services like Discord and Telegram. Furries love Telegram. There's a good chance that you'll find furry groups for people living in your state, your county, hell, maybe even in your town. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And don't be afraid to just be you. Being a furry is all about being yourself. Unless you're a Nazi, in which case, get the f*** out! You know, this was actually pretty fun to make. I should definitely make more of them. But firstly, I should probably do some research. Yeah, despite being part of this community for 9+ years, I am by no means an expert on all things furry, hence the research, starting with this book! Could have done without all the weird pictures, though.